A polymath, long story short, is somebody who is a generalist. That's pretty much the way that I define myself as I'm somebody who finds everything interesting, right? So whenever I'm confronted with something, usually I don't take it at face value or ignore it or get bored or get stressed out. Usually my response is, oh, that's kind of cool. We can't know everything anymore the way that people in the ancient world thought philosophers did, right? They didn't know
Right.
everything, right? Because we know much more than we did then, and we still don't know everything. We don't know
That's right.
anywhere near everything, right?
That's
So it's
right.
impossible. You can't know everything. But at the same time, human beings are learning machines. That's what we're built to do, right? Is to
Yes.
learn things, is to grow, right?
Welcome to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by my man, Audley Stephenson, the Odd Man.
Greetings and salutations. Welcome to the Audacious Living Podcast, where our goal is to help you live your best audacious life ever. It's a pleasure to have you here with us, and I appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us. So thank you so much. When you think about curiosity and learning, they very much are like seeds that, when nurtured, blossom into beautiful flowers of knowledge and growth. In our interview today with Joel Bouchard, we explore how embracing curiosity can lead to a life full of endless learning opportunities. Joel Bouchard is a seasoned educator and motivational speaker with a passion for inspiring others to unlock their full potential through curiosity and lifelong learning. Joel's expertise in education and personal development make him a perfect guest for this episode, where we delve into the transformative power of curiosity and continuous learning in shaping our audacious lives. So now that we've got you all set, let's turn to our conversation with Joel. Hey, Joel, thank you for joining me here today on the Audacious Living Podcast. It's a pleasure to connect with you like this. And I know I think I felt like months and months and months we were trying to set something up here. And so it feels great to finally land on today. Kind of like Christmas, right? Like we finally made it to Christmas. So it's here. All the challenges that we had before doesn't matter anymore. Today is what matters. And thank you for being here today.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me on. We had to do a little bit of juggling of schedules, but it's good, right? It means that we're busy, doing the good work, and here we are now.
I love that. No, I do love that viewpoint, and I appreciate the perspective on being busy, because you're a guy that's got a lot on your plate. I mean, you're a doctoral student, you're a philosopher, you got your own podcast, you're a record producer, you're a former Army vet guy. So I mean, you've got so much that keeps you going. But interestingly enough, one of the things that you define yourself is a polymath. And it's a term that I'm not sure how many are familiar with. Certainly, ironically enough, I had just met someone very recently that said that polymath. That's why I sort of explored it a bit more, and then all of a sudden, you and I connect again. I'm like, I know what a polymath is, but for those who are listening and have never heard it before, maybe let's start there. Then perhaps you can fill them in a little bit about yourself and the million and one things you got on your plate.
Yeah, yeah. So a polymath, long story short, is somebody who is a generalist, right? And so in our modern day and age, most people are specialists, right? You go to college, you major in one thing, you get a job in that field, and then that's just kind of what you do. And that's kind of the end of the story. So I've taken a different approach to life in a lot of different ways where I've gone to school for lots of things, right? I've got a degree in criminal justice and interdisciplinary studies and education, and now I'm working on psychology. When I'm done, I'm thinking of starting physics. So a lot of different interests. And then my personal hobbies, like you mentioned, are just as diverse, from music and painting and writing. I've got a book coming out soon, and 3D printing and rock climbing and amateur astronomy, that sort of thing. And if you look throughout history, that's kind of what most philosophers were like up until recently.
Mhm.
Leonardo da Vinci and Plato, Aristotle, these types of guys were all kind of similar, right? Philosophers back then were known as people who knew everything there was to know in the world, right? Which isn't possible anymore. There's too
Right.
much knowledge. There's too many things going on.
Right.
Um, But I think that having a wide variety of interests sort of stems from being philosophical, right? And philosophy is really just the ability and the motivation to look beneath the surface on
Hmm.
whatever it is that you happen to be looking at the moment. So that's pretty much the way that I define myself, as I'm somebody who finds everything interesting, right? So whenever I'm confronted with something, usually I don't take it at face value or ignore it or get bored or get stressed out. Usually my response is, "Oh, that's kind of cool. Where did that come from? What does it mean for me now? What happens if this continues?" Asking
Hmm.
questions like that, the bigger questions.
I mean, there's a bunch of parts I really love about that approach to life. That's really what you're talking. It's an approach to life, is what you're describing. And um I mean, certainly there's this curiosity right off the bat, which is a phenomenal way to live as far as I'm concerned. Just remaining curious about things, that sense of wonder. Along with that, it comes excitement and joy, because you're learning and acquiring new skills and abilities, or just insights, right? So that really excites me. And then the idea of sort of continuous learning, because that means you're always in learning mode, right? Like if you're curious, you're always learning, you're always asking questions. So what that leads to is like you're always in some sort of growth mode, right? And so you're always getting better, you're always evolving, you're always expanding, you're not staying stagnant, right? So if you go back to use the example of the philosophers, they were well, I mean, I think there's a lot of pressure on being a philosopher, because you're supposed to have an opinion on everything. But how can you have an opinion on something that you haven't experienced? Like, so really what it is it's just an opinion now with nothing behind it. So whereas if you have some experiences, you have learnings, you have insights, you bring more to the table. And so those are a few things that jump out right off the bat to me when I hear you describe your experience as a polymath.
Yeah, and so, um, there's a couple things there,
Mhm.
and one of them is that, uh, the more things you know, right? And this is a famous philosophical quote, right, from one of the greatest philosophers of all time. The more you know, the more you realize you know nothing, right? And so, generally, real philosophers, right, and real polymaths, the more you learn different things, you come to two kind of realizations. One, there's a great interconnectedness between a lot of different things. So
Yep.
you might learn something, if you pick up a musical instrument, suddenly you might find that you're doing something completely different down the road. And somehow something that you learned during learning that instrument helps you figure out this other thing. So there's an interconnectedness, but there's also this realization that really firm epistemological knowledge is pretty elusive, and so some people get frustrated with me, right? They'll ask my opinion on things. Hey, you have a wide base of knowledge. What do you think about this thing?
Yep.
And I think what a real philosopher does in that situation, right, is you draw on the knowledge that you have and you construct rational arguments, but then at the end, you're always willing to say, um, but I don't know, and I could be wrong. And that's the part that gets people, right? Because people want to know and they want
Sure.
to be right. And so if they come to somebody who they view as an authority figure and that person says, well, based off of this, this, and this, and following this argument, I think that this is the case, but I'm not sure and I might be wrong. They go, well, now I'm not any farther along than I was originally.
Right.
But you are,
Right.
there is knowledge. That's the way that knowledge occurs, right? Both in philosophy and in science, right? I'm starting to be a social scientist.
Hmm.
And it's incremental, right? You learn little things, you triangulate knowledge, right? You draw on different sources and you
Yes.
have an idea of where it is, but these nailing down these details and saying, well, I know this for certain. Well, if you look at the history of science, the history of philosophy, many of those things that were huge critical insights
Hmm.
decades or centuries ago no longer hold up. But
Sure.
it's not because they were wrong. It's just because we built on them and they've become more detailed and they've
Yep.
taken twists that we could never have seen back then. So
Yep. Yep.
yeah, it's a very sort of tricky topic.
To your point, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. There's so much truth to that, because of the vast amount of knowledge and information that exists in the world today. And when you look at whether it's information you made available through the internet, or AI technology or whatever, like you realize just how much is out there. And I mean, it's the idea of trying to know everything just is just like it's just wow, it's incredible, but I don't think it's possible, right? And I
Yeah.
think too, it also lends for that room for an alternate viewpoint, an alternative reality, an alternative perspective, because that always exists, right? That always exists.
Yeah, absolutely. And to what you were saying, um, we can't know everything anymore the way that
Mhm.
people in the ancient world thought philosophers did, right? They didn't know
Right.
everything, right? Because we know much more than we did then, and we still don't know everything. We don't know
That's right.
anywhere near everything, right?
That's
So it's
right.
impossible. You can't know everything. But at the same time, human beings are learning machines. That's what we're built to do, right? Is to
Yes.
learn things, is to grow, right? And so I think that, it's hard to break out of this mindset in a specialist culture like what we have in the United States, where, okay, well, learning occurs between 8 a.m. and 3 p.m. from the time I'm 5 years old until the time I'm 21. And then that's it. That's it for the rest of my life, right? No, like you're constantly learning all the time. Your brain, I can tell you from my studies in psychology, your brain is always generating new neurons in your hippocampus, which is your learning center.
Yep.
And as a result, you're always forming new memories, new associations, coming to new insights. And so, really, I think success as a human being can be defined by how well you take advantage of that purpose, right? That
Mhm.
purpose, which is to learn and to grow and to
Right.
sort of explore the universe and the reality that we have here. Um, yeah,
Joel, I'd love to know where it started for you. Like, is it something that was kind of always there, or was something that you came to the realization of that you wanted to sort of acquire all this insight and knowledge and information?
yeah. I think that what I think that it's everybody has it, right? And I
Okay.
think that there's aspects of society that kind of snuff it out of people. Because we can all think of what is the little kid's favorite question, right? Why?
Why?
Why, right? And so, you have to try really hard to sort of snuff that curiosity out of them. So, I don't consider myself to be a smart person, right? What I like to tell people right off the bat is like, okay, I failed preschool, right? I did take preschool twice. You know, so and I struggled in school for, I did well, but I have struggled with social elements of it and other things. And so
Sure.
when I was in 3rd grade, my mom said, I think you might do better being homeschooled, right? And, yeah, really it starts with the innate human nature, right? We're curious by nature, we wanna learn.
Right. Right.
But then you need somebody to nurture that, and that was my mom, right? My mom showed me that, okay, we're going to do schoolwork during the day, but then after school hours, we're going to go to the museum, right? And hey, look at these dinosaur bones. Aren't these things cool? Could you imagine if this was a walking creature? And you go, yeah, this is neat. And pretty soon, if you have somebody with that sort of, perspective on it, now you're running around the museum reading every single placard, right? Because everything is super cool. It's just a little bit of imagination, a little bit of insight, a little bit of excitement, and the viewpoint that learning and becoming a better person, growing,
Right.
isn't confined to school hours.
No, you're absolutely correct. What did your parents do for a living?
So my mom was a nurse. My dad owned his own business making signs for a while, and then he was a pastor for a while. So
Okay. Yeah, I was just trying to see if there's a connection between what they were doing, or maybe there is one that maybe doesn't come isn't on the surface for me. What was there a connection between them and your desire for learning?
yeah, I think so. My mom is very much like me. So it's like, okay, she was a nurse. But that's just what she did for a living, right?
Right.
Outside of work, she was always looking at stuff under the microscope, doing different things, playing piano, and that type of stuff. And I consider myself the same way, right? We've gotten this far into the podcast, and you still don't know what I do for a living, right? You know all my hobbies, right?
Sure.
So my mom was kind of the same way. Um, so, and my dad also a very, obviously he was a very creative guy. He was just an excellent painter. He's a businessman.
Yeah.
Obviously, he had a very deep sense of spirituality. very creative.
Yes.
So yeah, I think that there was, in the genetics, there was definitely some of it there already.
Right.
And then there was the social environmental aspect of it that they sort of nurtured the curiosity as well. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
got
No.
lucky.
No, well, and it's a nice sort of combination, I would say. And again, I look, and maybe I'm saying that because I'm biased, because I am a big fan of learning, right, and gaining insights, and so maybe that's why I say that. But um, I think it's a wonderful mix. And you're right. I haven't asked you what you did because I'm just so curious in general. And that, so I mean, we'll eventually get there. But before we do, I wonder if we could talk about curiosity, and just from your perspective, and why that's beneficial to us. You sort of talked a little bit about before, and children, and and them, their natural inquisitive nature to ask why. And I do agree with you. But yeah, I wonder if you could talk about curiosity in general.
Yeah, so I mean, if you think about it, curiosity most likely exists as a survival mechanism, right? You want to figure out you want to essentially you want to be a fortune teller, right? You want to be a future predictor. And that's sort of built in our biology all the way down into dreaming, right? The most prevalent theory of dreaming is that while you're asleep, your brain's taking information that you've gathered throughout the day and trying to predict what would happen in a variety of different scenarios. And I think curiosity is sort of linked in that same way, right? We have this urge to know about the unknown. And like we were mentioned a little bit earlier, the more we know about the unknown, the more we
Mhm.
don't know, and then the more we start to realize that we'll never really know. And and there comes a point, I think, and this is where somebody transfers from being a normal person into a weird philosopher like me, right? Where all of a sudden the unknown or these off limit topics like, death or what
Right.
happened before the universe go from being scary because you don't know the answers to all of a sudden really interesting because you don't know the answers, right? It's just a
Mhm.
perspective shift where you go, no,
Mhm.
like it's awesome to me that life is way weirder than any fiction story you could ever write. It could not get any weirder than it is.
Right.
Um, and so I think that, that's sort of the point of curiosity is basically just trying to figure it out. And then I think that the flip side to that is the maturation of curiosity is the recognition that you won't be able to, but you want to try anyways, right?
Sure. Sure. So there'd be a school of thought that curiosity is a natural thing. Others may say it's you got to learn how to do it. But let's just for a moment put those two arguments aside. What if you just aren't naturally curious, or like, but you want to be? How do you become more curious?
Yeah, I would challenge that, right? Because I think everybody is curious about something, right?
Hmm.
No matter how plain or vanilla you think your life is, you have a passion of some kind, right? Something.
Hmm.
Even if it's just basic biological urges, right? Like, oh, I like to eat. Well, there's a good chance that you're pretty invested in that if you don't have any other hobbies, any other interest, right? And I think that that's just where curiosity comes from, right? It comes from what the things we're passionate about, the things that we're
Gotcha.
interested in. And so I think that it's a natural outflow of that. If you just like eating, you're going to kind of get interested in, okay, how the food is prepared or where
Right.
it comes from
Right.
or who makes the best food. Whatever aspect it is that appeals to you, something about it's going to. So I think that everybody is curious about something. As far as how you become more curious, I think that's a mindset shift that's a little bit more difficult.
Okay.
But it's just kind of an extrapolation, right? You're here, you have to engage in a variety of activities, right? If you want to live from the time you're born to the time you die, you have to do a lot of different stuff. And really, you can go one of two ways. You can sort of be dragged along and sighing and huffing and puffing, or you can sort of be an active participant in your life and say, hey, if I'm going to have to do this anyways, let's figure out what it's about, you know? And that's a lot of what it boils down to, I think.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I just, again, I'm a fan of a lot of things, and curiosity is one of them. I think that when you're always in this curious state of mind, and you're always wondering, it does so much for. I even think it's a healthy thing, quite frankly. Like it's there's a connection to your health because you're just always this inquisitive and wanting to learn more and gather more and understand more. It might be annoying to some people. Who knows? I don't know, but I know I can get really inquisitive at times and want to understand. And so I do take your point in about we all have that curiosity or a level. I guess there's a level of curiosity in all of us, and so I guess it's more around how do how you move the bar up from one level to the next. And I think to your point, starting with your interest is a great strategy.
Yeah, I think that, when I'm a musician, right? So
Okay.
how did that come about? Um, well, it's not the typical story, right? I didn't start playing piano when I was 4 or anything. As a matter of fact, I didn't listen to music until I was 13.
Okay.
Just a
Wow.
really weird kid. Like, I didn't like music, so I didn't listen to it. Like, who does that? Like,
Right.
it doesn't make
Right.
any sense. Well, anyways, I'm 13 and my friends go, we're teenage boys. So we're like, what's cooler than starting a band? Nothing. So let's start a band, right? And none of us played any instruments. You go, okay, well, you'll play drums and you'll play guitar. And
Yeah.
so I get guitar. Um, and so it just started as, okay, well, this is just something I'm going to do with my friends. I don't even like music, which is weird, but
Right.
um,
Right.
so I start listening. I start trying to figure out how to play the guitar so I can be a contributing member to the band, not be the
Yeah.
most embarrassing guy on stage, right?
Right. Right.
And pretty soon I find out, hey, you know what? Guitar's really cool. And then my bass player moves out of state to go to college. My drummer gets married really young. The band breaks up. And I go, man, I'm just starting to learn about music. And now it's over. Okay, well, I have two options. I can, someday you can tell your grandkids about that time you were in a band, or you can go, you know what? I'm in it now. And that's what I did. I was 19. I took my life savings up to that point. I went, I bought all the instruments. I taught myself how to build a computer for my studio.
Right.
I taught myself how to use the recording equipment. I taught myself the instruments. And I started putting out albums, right? That was it. Nobody ever taught me this stuff, and I don't think that I'm special. I
Right.
think that anybody could do it, but I think that you do have to have that motivation, right? It's not a matter of
Mm.
intelligence, it's not a matter of talent or skill. It's just
Yep.
a matter of really wanting to do it, really being curious and inquisitive
Yep.
and then, sort of jumping in.
Well, and it's interesting because you mentioned talent and skill, and there's this thing called practice. That's how you get better at anything, right? Like it's just not. I mean, there are people who are just naturally inclined to certain things, and we also acknowledge that that exists. But by and large, to get good at anything requires some level of practice, some consistency, repetitions. You keep doing it and do it and doing it. I mean, I've done over 1,000 podcast episodes. Well, after a while, you kind of get okay at it. I mean, I'm still working on myself, but my point is that you got to keep on going, and it as much as you uh, make it look easy to some, right? And again, people, and you maybe you've heard that where people go, you make it look so easy, right? What they're not catching on or recognizing is all the work that was done, all the practice in the wee hours of the morning, that they're unaware of to see you get to the point that you are. And so I would say this practice has a big part of it, of getting good at anything.
Yeah, and identifying what practice routines are important
Mm.
and kind of what I was saying at the beginning of the show, which is what lessons can you carry over from other things that you've learned? Because
Mm.
believe it or not, I'm not a huge like I don't do a whole lot of practice with musical instruments, right?
Okay.
So what I did is I did spend, right, a good year focusing on each one and learning how to play it.
Hmm.
So sort of mastering the basic technical details.
Hmm.
Um but after that point what I found myself doing was sort of relying on um just sort of you know basically digging ruts for myself, right? I go, okay, well, if I promise to practice guitar 1 hour a day, what I find myself doing is playing the same thing 1 hour each day. Then all of a sudden my songs start to sound all the same. And I don't like
Mm-hmm.
that, right? So once I had the technical details down, then I would basically give myself some space from the instrument, right? Play something else, or I'd go and I'd paint, or I'd go and I'd write, or I'd do something different. And sometimes I'd come back 1 or 2 or 3 months later
Hmm.
and pick it up and go, okay, now that I've been playing drums for a while, what do I think about the guitar? Right.
Mm.
Or, I think the sort of the intent of all art is to provide something that people expect in an unexpected way, right?
Yep.
Whether it's telling stories in a book or a TV show or a painting or a song, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so I think that the more you engage in other art forms, the more that opens your mind to, okay,
Yeah.
am I doing something that's predictable? Am I writing a song that's going to be boring?
Mhm.
Or am I providing something that's going to be catchy that people are going to want to hear, but they
Yes.
don't know exactly what's coming, and so therefore it's going to be exciting, right? And
Mm.
so I think that's sort of the two-edged sword of practice that I always like to talk about is you always want to be practiced enough to have the technical skill to be able
Sure.
to do a good job.
Yep.
And there is some amount of repetition and consistency that is required for that. But on the
Yep.
other side, there is just sort of the human inclination that with so much practice, if you get caught up in just practicing certain things, you can dull your creative edge a little bit.
Mm.
So you have to be mindful about practice, right? You can't just go in and say, okay, I'm going to do an hour a day. I'm going to practice these chords and these
Right.
scales, and
Right.
therefore I'll have them down pat. Because if you do that, then you'll start using them as a crutch.
That's right. That's right. It's interesting, I'm a big basketball guy, right? And then I love basketball. I play a little bit. I worked I worked in it professionally, and then I've coached like kids, and as a coach, it's really interesting because you can run plays and you can set up all these things and to get your team better. But the number one way to develop is just to go out and play. Forget the plays, just go out and play, right? And so to your point with practicing, yeah, you can run these chords, you can do them for an hour, whatever, and sure, whatever, but just play.
Yeah.
And through that process of just doing, right? The skills get refined. You're instinctively you'll get better. Your ear will pick up things like musically from a musical standpoint. Your ear will pick up things and understand. So it's just a matter of doing and that really and that's a form of practice, right? Just go out and doing. So um,
Yeah, and that's
yeah.
real life practice, right? Sports is a great example. I've played a lot of sports throughout my life as well.
Hmm.
And you
Hmm.
go, okay, if you just taught everybody the plays and you wanted people to execute the plays exactly as they're written, well, the other team knows the plays too, right? So,
Sure.
okay, you're constantly getting turned over,
Yeah.
you're getting shots blocked all over. But at the
Yeah.
same time, if you don't teach people the plays, you just go, hey, go out there and have fun, then it's chaos, right? It's no good.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
you need some mixture of that, right? You need the foundationals, but you also want people to express some creativity, and from your star players, they might have one really good move, but if that's the only move they have, then the other team picks up on it, right? So they have to sort of, hone their game, adjust their game, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Podcasting is the same way, right? You see that mistake with a lot of early podcasters. They'll come in, they'll have every single question written out, and then it's just question, answer,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And you go, well, what makes podcasting magical is that it's a conversation, right? That there's a
That's
back
right.
and forth about things
That's
that
right.
were said. So,
That's
yeah,
right.
and what that boils down to is we move from practice to play, right? And play is an integral part of being human.
Yeah.
Even you look in the wild, right? You see animals play, and not just little animals, right? It's not just for kids.
No.
You see big animals playing.
That's right.
You go, okay, we wouldn't do that if it wasn't very important for our cognitive development, and it
That's
is.
right.
It's very good for us to play. It's part of that growth mindset.
Got you. No, I hear you. I hear you. So, I don't know how long we've been talking now, but I don't know what you do. So let's start there. What do you
Sure.
do for a living?
Yeah, so I am the production manager for a manufacturing facility that makes parts for the power grid. So on
Okay.
face value, a lot of people are like, okay, well, that sounds kind of anticlimactic. And maybe it is, but this is another area where why do I do this job? I've been offered, $40,000 a year more than what I'm getting paid to do other jobs,
Hmm.
but I like my job, right? And so I think
Hmm.
with work, if you're going to do something for a third of your life, you better enjoy it, right? And
Sure.
so my job has a great mix of um, physical challenges, cognitive challenges, social challenges, There's a lot of different things that I'm involved with, and it's for a good cause, right? It's for keeping people, giving people power, giving them access to electricity and things. So
Mm.
it's great. I love it, and but yeah, that's what I do for a living.
And how did you get there? Like, did you have prior experience, or how did that happen for you?
Here we go with inquiry right again. I started at the very bottom, right? I started as the guy who was making parts. And every once in a while, the GM would come out on the floor and I'd talk with him and I'd ask him questions like, hey, what kind of
Mm.
steel is this mold made out of? Oh, it's a 440. Okay. Hey, what's the difference between a silicone rubber and an EDPM, right? And that interest, right? Okay, well now, hey, there's an opening for a second shift supervisor. Hey, there's an opening for a production scheduling and an inventory guy. Hey, now there's an opening for a production manager, right?
Mm.
So, and there's a lot of other things that I do in the job that aren't included in the title, to the point now where there's almost nothing in the whole company that I haven't done at least once or twice, right?
Love it. Love it.
And that makes you a valuable member of the company, and it also gives you less stress about going to work, right? Because now you understand the big picture. And so if you can't accomplish something, you know the exact reasons why you can't do it. And you can sort of
Right.
articulate that to customers or to your boss or to whoever,
Mhm.
in a way that is effectively communicative.
Gotcha.
So, again, being curious and inquisitive, uh, it's always a good approach to take.
I'd be remiss, and I think we've sort of touched on it a little bit, but like I wouldn't mind getting it deeper into the importance of a growth mindset. I think we've danced around it a fair amount in this conversation, but I think it's important enough that our listeners understand the positive impacts it can have on our lives.
Yeah, and so I think the most important thing to recognize is, we've talked about, we've gone into a little bit of detail about how I've gotten to where I am and tips for you to get there and that sort of thing.
Hmm.
But I think an important thing to mention is that um, a lot of growth in life isn't a planned thing. A lot of the stuff that I do. So I'm also a member of like my local government, and have done a bunch of other things that were spontaneous, right? Life does not move at your pace. Life moves at its pace, right? And you have to be ready to grab the opportunities that are presented to you when they're presented to you, because lots of times once they go, you never get them back. And so I
Yeah.
think that's the most important part of a growth mindset, isn't so much planning out how you're going to get somewhere, as being open to opportunities as they occur to you, no matter how scary or out there they seem.
Mhm. So the point that you made is um bang on with a lot of things that we talk about on this podcast, right? This is the Audacious Living Podcast, and we encourage individuals to take that step. Yeah, you can't see what the staircase looks like, but you take that step anyways. I'll oftentimes talk about the fact that one or two things will happen. You'll either learn how not to do something again, or you succeed, right? And so, how bad are those two options to have at your disposal? And so, the idea of moving forward, being audacious enough, letting go of the fear or the doubt or the suspicions, and moving forward anyways, because you never know where it'll go, and that's exactly what you've beautifully illustrated.
Yeah, there's a saying that I really like, and it's that you've never failed until you stop failing, right? And so when you think about it that way, all of a sudden this fear of failing kind of disappears, right? It's like, okay, well, it doesn't matter if I don't get it right this time, right?
Yeah,
Because if I don't get it right and then I stop, well, then I've failed. But
that's
if I
right.
don't get it right, but I keep trying, you can keep failing repeatedly. But as long as you don't stop trying, you have not failed.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
that, I think that's a great approach to take to
yeah.
anything in life. As long as you have the ability to continue to try, you continue to try, you continue to learn and to grow and to try to get to that next level.
I think there's a Michael Jordan quote where he says something to the effect, I'm going to butcher it for sure, but he says something to the effect that I've never lost a game, I just ran out of time, right? So,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right?
Exactly. That's the
So
same, yeah, same concept.
right? Where you just keep going and you keep going. Resiliency is a great word. Like you keep pushing through, because eventually, if you keep at it long enough, the positive results will come your way. Those who stop early, or they give up, or they're too tired, or and it's not a judgment at all, Joel. I'm not judging anyone for quitting, but just showing certain the hazards of quitting and what that can do, and essentially prevent you from getting that greatness that you're after.
Yeah, I remember in basic training for the army, our very last test was there was 4 days and 3 nights where you
Hmm.
didn't get to sleep, and the whole time, you're doing these mock fights and stuff. And the very last thing was a 12-mile march.
Okay.
So you got 80 pounds of gear on, and you're marching through the woods in the night. And I remember specifically there was this one girl that stopped. She said, "I can't do it anymore." Um, and the chaplain came beside her, and he's saying, "You got to keep on. What if it's just around the corner, and that it's there?"
Yeah.
And she just said, "No, I can't do anymore." And she dropped out. And it was just, and he knew, because he was part of the training. He knew it was just around the corner. He was trying to encourage her to get there, but she just had it in her mind that this was it. This was the end. She couldn't go any further. And who knows what became of her after that point. But the point is to go through 4 days of grueling,
Yeah. Yeah.
stuff, and then to let your mind beat you in the last 200 yards. You go, that's I could think that's something to always keep in mind is, if you don't know where the finish line is, it's possible it's right around the corner,
Yeah. Yeah.
and if it's not, it's possible that no matter how far it is, the block is mental. It's your mind saying that you can't do
Sure.
it, not actually anything that's really standing in your way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the reality is, in most cases, no matter how far it is, it's closer than the distance that you travel to get to the point that you're at now. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that there's some value, and it's kind of looking back at our journey and how far we've come, because then we can give her some credit, maybe some motivation, some energy to keep pushing forward, because we have come a far way, right? And in the case of your friend, like she's gone a far way, 4 days. Yeah, you're almost there. How much further can it be? Well, it's closer than where you come from. So there you
Yeah.
go.
Yeah, and again, it's that mindset, right? If you go through everything in life, and everything is just a checklist, just
Yep.
something that, oh boy, well, I've got to get through this. Well, then you get to the end of your life and you go back and you go, well, the whole thing was kind of a miserable disaster, right? Whereas if you're interested and you're curious and you want to grow, um, even if something is hard, it never really seems like work, right? And I remember specifically the marches being my favorite part of army training, because when you're doing the marches, you're supposed to be tactical. So the drill sergeants wouldn't yell, it was quiet. A
Yep.
lot of them were done at nighttime. And so, it's just this cool nighttime breeze, and it's quiet for the first time. And, even though your feet and your ankles and your knees, everything's killing you, there's some aspect of it that's positive, right? There's some aspect of it that's there to be enjoyed. And it's true of anything, right? It's the same thing at your job. It's the same thing with your hobbies, with anything in life. You just have to find it. You have to find the stuff that's
Nice.
that's good, and you have to put into perspective the stuff that you think is killing you, and realize that maybe it's not as big as you thought it was.
Yeah. I love it. I love that perspective. Um, but I'd be remiss if I didn't give you an opportunity, before we go, for you to touch on your podcast. You're a fellow podcaster, as I am, and so you got a podcast from nowhere to nothing. I wonder if you could sort of talk about that.
Sure. Yeah. So from nowhere to nothing, it's a philosophy podcast. What we like to do is each week we'll take one or two words and we'll spend a whole hour talking about them. And usually what we do is we'll look at the historical aspect, what philosophers have said throughout time about a
Yep.
topic. And then in the middle, me and my resident expert will kind of hash out in that historical context, and our modern context, what it kind of means. And then towards the end, we'll ask speculative questions, right? All right, given the things that we've talking about, what are the takeaways for us personally? What are the takeaways for society? What does it mean for the future? So it's sort of just a fun journey through taking one word and realizing just how complex and deep that can be.
Yeah, I listened to your podcast about entertainment. You had an in-depth conversation about entertainment, and I appreciate hearing. I appreciate the dialogue. And I appreciate you, Joel, for being here on the Audacious Living Podcast. I got to tell you, you've got some really fabulous insights that connect deeply and resonate with what we talk about here. So I appreciate you for that. For our listeners that wanted to connect with you and learn more about your work, where could we send them?
I always say I'm the world's worst marketer. It's just it's something I have never had time to do. So, yeah, you can find my podcast by googling From Nowhere to Nothing. If you're interested in listening to my music, you can look on Apple Music, Spotify, wherever you listen to it, you'll find my albums. Um, and then really that's about it.
Nice, nice. Well, look, we'll make sure also that we'll have some of the show notes below for our listeners. So yeah, we'll make sure that that's accessible. Thank you, Joel, for doing this. This has been good. Like I said, it took us a long road to get here, but we're here now, and nothing else that happened before matters. And I appreciate you. Continue the great work, and best of luck, my friend.
Yeah, it was totally worth it. I appreciate you having me on. It was a lot of fun.
Cool. Back right here on the podcast, in our conversation with Joel, we discovered that true audacity comes from embracing curiosity, stepping out of our comfort zones, and seizing every opportunity to learn and grow. To connect with Joel directly and learn more about his work, be sure to check out the contact details provided in the show notes below. Joel is currently offering a limited time discount on his online course, Curiosity Unleashed, a journey to lifelong learning, and that's exclusive for Audacious Living Podcast listeners. So be sure to take advantage of this special offer, and it's a great opportunity. Thank you for tuning into the Audacious Living Podcast. If you have enjoyed today's episode, consider following, subscribing, and sharing if you haven't already done so, because of course that's how we're able to grow and inspire even more listeners to live their best audacious lives ever. Until next time, stay safe, be kind, show love to one another, and be audacious.
You've been listening to the Audacious Living Podcast, hosted by Audley Stephenson. If you enjoyed what you heard, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Until next time, be audacious.